Story 1. James Scott Porter was born on August 15, 1971. The exact town where he was born is not widely recorded, but he grew up in Texas. His early childhood was not stable. He later told people that one of his stepfathers raped him when he was a young boy. This was a very painful event. James did not receive any counseling or help for what happened. He carried that anger and hurt inside him for many years. When James was about 14 years old, he decided to run away from home. He left because he could no longer live in that house with his stepfather. Once he was on the streets, he had to take care of himself. He had no money and no safe place to sleep. He looked for groups of people who would accept him. He found white supremacist groups. These groups taught hatred toward many people, including homosexuals and people of other races. James joined these groups because they seemed to understand his anger. He felt like he belonged somewhere for the first time. He stayed with these groups for many years. He got many tattoos on his body to show his loyalty to white supremacist beliefs. When James became a young adult, he started committing crimes. His first recorded crime was a burglary. In 1990, he pleaded guilty to burglary of a building. The judge did not send him to prison. Instead, the judge gave him 8 years of probation. This meant James could stay free as long as he followed the rules and did not break the law again. But James did break the law again. In 1991, he committed another burglary. He was caught and convicted again. This time, the judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison. James went to prison for the first time. He served his time and was later released on parole. Parole meant he was allowed to leave prison early, but he had to follow strict rules. After getting out of prison, James did not change his behavior. In 1995, he committed a much more serious crime. He killed a man. The victim was a 40-year-old white male who was homeless. James shot this man 2 times in the head. After shooting him, James dumped the body into a water well. He did not show any sorrow for what he had done. Instead, he told people that he believed he had done society a favor by killing this man. The police arrested James for this murder. He went to trial. On April 21, 1995, he was convicted of murder with a deadly weapon. The judge sentenced him to 45 years in prison. James was sent to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Barry-Telford unit. This prison is in northeast Texas, near the town of Texarkana. While serving this 45-year sentence, James got into more trouble inside the prison. In 1998, before the main crime of this story, he was convicted of possessing a deadly weapon inside the prison. The weapon was a homemade knife. This showed that James was still willing to break rules, even while locked up. By the year 2000, James had been in prison for 5 years of his 45-year sentence. He was 28 years old. He still had many years left to serve. He spent his days inside the Telford unit with hundreds of other inmates. He still had his white supremacist tattoos and beliefs. He still carried anger from his childhood. And he was about to make a choice that would change everything. At the start of May 2000, James Porter began thinking about killing someone inside the prison. He later admitted that he had been planning to kill someone for some time. He did not have one specific person in mind at first. He just wanted to kill. 1 week before the attack, James made a decision. He chose 2 weapons. The first weapon was a rock. The rock weighed about 2 pounds. He smuggled this rock into his cell. He also got a pillowcase. He planned to put the rock inside the pillowcase so he could swing it without dropping the rock. The second weapon was a makeshift knife. He made this knife inside the prison. He hid both weapons in his cell. The night before May 28, 2000, James took 11 pills of a medication called Dilantin. This medicine is usually prescribed for seizures. James took the pills because he wanted to feel a rush when he killed someone. He wanted to be ready. He did not care who the victim would be. On May 28, 2000, James walked into the prison day room. The day room is a common area where inmates can sit at tables, talk, or watch television. James looked around for a victim. He saw a man sitting at a table. The man's name was Rudy Delgado. Rudy was 40 years old. He was Hispanic. He was serving a 15-year prison sentence for sexually assaulting a child. James later claimed that Rudy had made a pass at him several times, asking if James was interested in sex with him. James said this angered him because he hated homosexuals. James picked up the pillowcase that had the rock hidden inside. He came up behind Rudy Delgado, who was still sitting at the table and did not see James approaching. James raised the pillowcase with the rock and struck Rudy on the head from behind. The blow was hard and fast. Rudy fell forward off his chair and landed on the floor. He was hurt but still alive. He lay on the ground. He could not get up. He was helpless. James did not stop. He continued to hit Rudy's head and face with the rock inside the pillowcase. He hit him many times. Rudy's face began to break apart from the force of the blows. The pillowcase was taking damage from the sharp edges of the rock. Eventually, the pillowcase ripped open. The rock fell out or became exposed. When the pillowcase ripped, James pulled out his makeshift knife. He stabbed Rudy in the head and face with this knife. Rudy was still on the ground. He could not defend himself. After stabbing Rudy, James stood up. He was wearing steel-toed work boots. These are heavy boots with hard metal inside the toe area. James raised his foot and stomped on Rudy's head and face. He stomped multiple times. The steel toes caused even more damage. By the time James stopped, Rudy's face was destroyed. A prosecutor later said that the face could not be recognized as human. Prison guards heard the attack or saw what was happening. They ran toward James. But James did not try to run away. He stopped attacking and surrendered to a correctional officer. He gave himself up without a fight. Right after the attack, investigators came to question James. He agreed to give a written statement. In that statement, he confessed to killing Rudy Delgado. He explained that he had been planning to kill someone for a while. He said he chose the rock and the knife 1 week before the murder. He admitted taking the 11 Dilantin pills the night before to help with the rush of killing someone, no one in particular. He said he picked his victim at random, but later he added that Rudy was a convicted child molester who had made a pass at him. James showed no sadness or regret in his confession. He was calm. He explained every step of what he had done. The investigators had all the information they needed. James had killed a fellow inmate in a brutal way, and he had admitted to it in writing. The crime was discovered immediately because it happened in front of other inmates and prison guards. James Porter did not run or hide. He surrendered to a correctional officer right after he stopped stomping on Rudy Delgado's head. The guards secured the scene. They called medical staff, but Rudy Delgado was already dead from the severe blows to his head and face. The prison's internal investigators took over. They collected evidence from the day room. They found the torn pillowcase, the 2-pound rock, and the makeshift knife. They also took photographs of the crime scene and of Rudy Delgado's body. The injuries were so severe that the face could not be recognized as human. Investigators interviewed James Porter in a private room inside the prison. He agreed to give a written statement. In that statement, he confessed to everything. He wrote that he had planned to kill someone for a long time. He said he had picked the rock and the knife a week before the attack. He also admitted taking 11 Dilantin pills the night before to get a rush from killing. He told them he chose his victim at random, but later he added that Delgado was a child molester who had made a pass at him. The confession was clear and detailed. The investigators did not need to look for other suspects. James had given them a full account of the murder. Because the murder happened inside a Texas state prison, the case was handled by local authorities in Bowie County. The district attorney's office received the confession and the evidence. The prosecutor assigned to the case was James Elliott. He reviewed the file and decided to charge James Porter with capital murder. Capital murder in Texas is a crime that can lead to the death penalty. Murdering a fellow inmate while already serving a prison sentence was one of the situations that made the crime capital murder. While James was waiting for his trial, he wrote several letters. He sent one letter to Prosecutor James Elliott. In the letter, James said that he should be applauded for ridding society of a child molester. He wrote that he was proud of what he had done. In another letter, James said he would kill again. He said he did not care if his next victim was another prisoner or a correctional officer. These letters were kept by the prosecutor as evidence of James's state of mind and his lack of remorse. The trial took place in March 2001 in Bowie County, Texas. The jury heard the facts of the case. They saw the photographs of the crime scene. They heard the confession that James had given to investigators. The prosecutor also showed the letters James had written, where he bragged about the murder and said he would kill again. James Porter did not put up a strong defense. Outside the presence of the jury, he told the judge that he wanted to be convicted and sentenced to death. He did not want to fight the charges. His lawyer tried to do what James asked, but James made it clear that he wanted the death penalty. The jury found James Porter guilty of capital murder. Then the same jury had to decide his punishment. In Texas, the jury must answer special questions. One question is whether the defendant would be a danger to society in the future. Given that James had already killed twice, the 1995 murder of a homeless man and now the prison murder, and had written letters saying he would kill again, the jury answered yes. The jury also found no reason to give him a life sentence instead. The judge followed the jury's decision and sentenced James Porter to death. After the sentence, James had the right to appeal. His case went automatically to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. In April 2003, that court affirmed his conviction and sentence. That meant the appeals court agreed that the trial was fair and the punishment was correct. James then had the chance to ask for federal appeals. But he did not want to. He told his lawyer that he no longer wished to pursue any appeals. He wanted to be executed. His lawyer asked a federal judge to decide whether James was mentally competent to make that choice. The judge appointed a psychiatrist to examine James. The psychiatrist concluded that James was competent. In February 2004, the federal court dismissed his case because James asked them to. He did not request clemency from the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. He did not ask the governor to stop his execution. On January 4, 2005, James Scott Porter was taken to the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was given a final meal. He chose 2 extra crispy fried chicken breasts, 2 thighs, onion rings, French fries, fried okra, 5 slices of buttered garlic bread, a bowl of country gravy, sliced onions, pickles, jalapeno peppers, ketchup, mustard, sliced tomato, 1 pot of thick coffee, and a banana split. His final words were spoken to the witnesses. He said, "I am sorry for the pain I have caused you. I know it is a great loss, and I want to apologize. I am sorry, and to my family I love you, and I will see you all in heaven." The lethal injection was then started. James Scott Porter was pronounced dead at 6:12 p.m. He was 33 years old. Rudy Delgado's sister, Anna Acevedo, watched the execution. Afterward, she said she believed he was taken out too easily, and that his apology was not good enough for her. James Porter became the first murderer executed in the United States in 2005 and the 337th murderer executed in Texas since 1976. That was the end of James Scott Porter's life, but Rudy Delgado's family still carries the loss of their brother, who was beaten to death inside a prison day room. Story 2. Donald J. Beardsley was born on May 13, 1943, in St. Louis, Missouri. He was the first child in his family. Later, he had a younger brother and a younger sister. His parents were working-class people. They did not have a lot of money, but they provided a normal home for their children. As a child, Donald did not stand out as violent or strange. He went to school like other kids. His grades were average. He was not known for getting into fights or causing serious trouble. Teachers and neighbors did not report any alarming behavior from him. His family life was not perfect, but it was not extremely broken or abusive either. Donald finished high school. After graduation, he decided to join the United States Air Force. He trained to become a mechanic. The Air Force taught him how to work on aircraft engines and other machinery. He learned to follow orders and live by strict rules. He served his time without major problems. Eventually, he left the Air Force and returned to civilian life. In 1969, when Donald was 26 years old, he did something very serious. He met a 52-year-old woman at a bar in St. Louis. That same night, he went to her apartment. He used a knife to stab her in the throat. Then he left her body in a bathtub where she bled to death. Donald later said the killing had no real reason. He described it as senseless. The police arrested him for that murder. Donald pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He received a sentence of 18 years in prison. He served 7 years of that sentence. Then, in 1977, he was released on parole. The prison officials decided he could go free early. After his release, Donald left Missouri. He moved to California to be near his mother. He found a place to live in Redwood City. He also got a job as a machinist at a company called Hewlett-Packard. His bosses gave him good job reviews. He worked hard and did his tasks correctly. To his co-workers, he seemed like a normal man trying to start over. While on parole in California, Donald did not have many friends. He lived alone in a small studio apartment. He kept to himself most of the time. He followed the rules of his parole. He went to work each day. He did not get into trouble with the law during his first few years in California. But his past followed him quietly, and the parole conditions meant he was not completely free. One day in early 1981, Donald was driving on a road. He saw a young woman hitchhiking. He stopped his car and picked her up. The hitchhiker Donald picked up was a young woman named Ricky Soria. She was a drug addict and also worked as a prostitute. Donald let her move into his small apartment in Redwood City. He wanted to help her stop using drugs and get away from bad people she knew. But instead, Soria brought her friends into Donald's life. One of those friends was a 19-year-old man named Bill Forrester. Another was a drug dealer named Frank Rutherford. Rutherford carried guns and collected drug debts. He had a reputation for violence. He also bragged that he would never go to jail because he or his brothers would kill any witnesses. Through Soria, Donald met two young women who lived together as close friends. Their names were Patty Gedling, age 23, and Stacy Benjamin, age 19. Patty was a mother. Stacy sold drugs and had a reputation for cheating people in drug deals. Patty sometimes sold drugs too. On April 23, 1981, Soria told Donald that Stacy had cheated Bill Forrester in a drug deal. The deal was only for $185. But Forrester was angry. He wanted revenge. Frank Rutherford decided to help Forrester get back at the two women. The next day, April 24, 1981, Donald agreed to help Rutherford and Forrester. The plan was to lure Patty and Stacy to Donald's apartment that evening. Donald's apartment would be the trap. Rutherford brought a shotgun. He cut a piece of wire and twisted the ends around shotgun shells. This was to make a strangling tool. Donald told Soria to go out and buy duct tape. She bought the tape and brought it back. The tape was going to be used to tie the women's hands and gag them. Donald expected that Rutherford and Forrester would just rough the women up, tie them, take their money and drugs, and then leave. He did not think anyone would be killed at first. That evening, around 6:30 p.m., Patty and Stacy arrived at Donald's apartment. Donald opened the door for them. They walked toward Soria, who was sitting on the sofa. Suddenly, Rutherford fired the shotgun. The bullet hit Patty in her left shoulder. She was wounded but not dead. Donald took Patty into the bathroom. He tried to stop her bleeding. Both women's hands and feet were tied with the duct tape. Rutherford told Patty they would take her to a hospital, but he winked at Donald. Donald understood that Rutherford was lying. Between 9 and 10 p.m., Donald and Forrester left the apartment. They brought back Rutherford's car. Then the group discussed what to do. Donald realized that Rutherford planned to kill the women. Rutherford handed Donald some shotgun shells. Donald said, "I'm not going to do this." Forrester then said, "Well, I guess I'm going to do it." They loaded Patty into her own van. Forrester drove the van. Donald sat as a passenger. Soria followed in Donald's car. Rutherford stayed behind at the apartment with Stacy. Forrester drove south on Highway 1. He turned onto a small road called Bean Hollow Road in San Mateo County. They stopped in a remote area. Patty got out of the van. She began to plead for her life. Donald loaded the shotgun for Forrester. Forrester shot Patty twice. Then Donald reloaded the gun. Donald fired 2 more shots at Patty's head. The shots at close range killed her instantly. The group left her body in a ditch beside the road. After that, the van ran out of gas. Donald, Soria, and Forrester wiped their fingerprints off the van. They abandoned it. Donald and Soria dropped off Forrester. Then they returned to Donald's apartment. When they got back, Rutherford called them. He was at his girlfriend's apartment nearby. He told them to come over. They arrived between 3 and 3:30 a.m. on April 25th. Stacy was there, watching television. She did not know what had happened to Patty. Out of Stacy's hearing, Donald told Rutherford that Forrester had chickened out and that Donald had to finish the killing. Rutherford said Donald should have killed Forrester too. Donald said Soria had refused to give him more shells for that. Then, while Stacy was present, Donald and Rutherford talked as if Patty was in the hospital. They lied to keep Stacy calm. Around 5 a.m., Donald, Rutherford, Soria, and Stacy left in Donald's car. They made several stops. They got money Stacy was owed for drugs. Soria bought cocaine, and they used it. They stopped to see Rutherford's brother in Sebastopol. Donald heard Rutherford ask his brother for advice on where to drop off Stacy. Donald understood this meant where to kill her and leave her body. They drove north on Highway 101. Rutherford told Stacy they were going to Lakeport to get more drugs. Donald turned onto a winding side road. They stopped at a turnout in a secluded area of Lake County, north of San Francisco. Stacy became upset, but Rutherford convinced her to get out of the car. All 4 walked up a hill. Rutherford had fixed a wire to use for strangling. Donald and Soria walked away so they could not see Rutherford and Stacy. Then Donald heard a commotion. Soria told him to go help Rutherford. Donald found Rutherford sitting on top of Stacy, strangling her with one hand. A broken wire was under her neck. Rutherford called Stacy a die-hard bitch. Stacy looked at Donald with a pleading expression. Donald punched her in the left temple, trying to knock her out. It did not work. Donald then held one end of a wire that was wrapped around Stacy's throat. Rutherford pulled the other end. Rutherford took both ends, pulled tight, and twisted. The 2 men dragged Stacy to a more secluded area. Donald asked Rutherford for his knife. Rutherford gave it to him. Donald slit Stacy's throat twice. The cuts cut her left jugular vein. Blood came out slowly, not spurting. Stacy was still alive when her throat was cut because blood was found in her lungs. After Stacy was dead, Rutherford suggested that they pull down her pants. Donald did so. They wanted it to look like Stacy had been sexually assaulted. Then late that afternoon, Donald, Rutherford, and Soria drove back to the girlfriend's apartment. The victims had been killed. Patty Gedling was shot in the head. Stacy Benjamin was strangled and had her throat cut. Both murders happened on April 25, 1981, because of a dispute over a $185 drug deal. The first discovery happened on the morning of April 25, 1981. Joggers found Patty Gedling's body in a ditch beside Bean Hollow Road in San Mateo County. They called the police. Officers arrived and examined the scene. They found a shoe repair claim ticket among Patty's clothing. The ticket had a telephone number written on it. That number belonged to Donald Beardsley. Detective Sergeant Robert Morse of the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office called the number. He reached Donald. Morse asked Donald to come to the sheriff's office to give a statement. Donald agreed to come. When Donald arrived, Morse first talked about the difference between a witness and a suspect. Then Morse asked Donald directly if he was involved in the case. Donald replied, "Well, Frank Rutherford shot her, but I guess I'm involved because I shot her in the head twice myself. I was afraid." After Donald said this, Morse read him his Miranda rights. Donald then agreed to give a full taped statement. In that taped statement, Donald described both murders in detail. He told police where to find Stacy Benjamin's body. Based on Donald's directions, officers went to a remote area near Hopland Grade Road in Lake County. They found Stacy's body. They also found other physical evidence at different locations in San Mateo County. The taped confession and a written transcript became key evidence for the prosecution. Police arrested Donald for the murders. As he had done in Missouri years earlier, Donald quickly confessed to the crimes. He agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. He became the lead witness in the trials of his co-defendants. The trials of the other people involved happened first. Frank Rutherford was prosecuted for the murder of Stacy Benjamin. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Years later, Rutherford died in prison. Ricky Soria, the hitchhiker who lived with Donald, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She received a long prison sentence and remained in prison for many years. Bill Forrester, the 19-year-old who claimed he was ripped off in the drug deal, was tried but found not guilty. He was acquitted and released. Donald's own trial came last. He was tried for the first-degree murders of Patty Gedling and Stacy Benjamin. The jury heard his confessions and his taped statements. They also heard testimony about the Missouri murder from 1969. The prosecution argued that Donald knew what he was doing and acted with intent. The defense argued that Donald acted out of fear of Frank Rutherford. The jury found Donald guilty of both murders with special circumstances. The special circumstances included committing multiple murders and killing to prevent a witness from testifying. For the murder of Patty Gedling, the jury sentenced Donald to death. For the murder of Stacy Benjamin, the jury sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge entered the judgment of death on March 12, 1984. Donald appealed his conviction and death sentence many times over the next 20 years. State and federal courts reviewed his case repeatedly. One appeal claimed that his lawyers were not effective. Another claimed that brain damage from birth and head injuries made him unable to make good judgments. A neuropsychologist reported that part of his brain was not functioning properly. The courts rejected these claims. A federal appeals court in 2004 denied his habeas corpus petition. The judges found that while some errors happened during the trial, those errors did not change the outcome. In January 2005, Donald's lawyers asked California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger for clemency. They wanted the death sentence changed to life without parole. They presented evidence of brain damage and argued that Donald had been a model prisoner for 21 years. The governor denied clemency. He wrote that nothing convinced him Donald did not understand the wrongfulness of his actions. The governor also noted that Donald was the only participant in the crimes who had a prior murder conviction and who delivered the fatal blows to both women. Donald's lawyers also filed last-minute appeals with the United States Supreme Court. One appeal claimed that lethal injection was cruel and unusual punishment. Another claimed that jurors were unfairly influenced. The Supreme Court denied both appeals without comment on January 18, 2005. The governor also rejected a request for a 120-day delay. That same night, Donald was moved to a holding cell next to the death chamber at San Quentin State Prison. He did not request a special final meal. He drank some grapefruit juice. He spent his last hours talking with his spiritual advisor and his legal team. He did not make a final statement. He chose not to have any family members witness the execution. Just after midnight on January 19, 2005, guards strapped Donald to a gurney in the death chamber. They inserted intravenous tubes into his arms. The process took about 16 minutes. Then 3 chemicals were injected. The first was a sedative. The second was a paralyzing agent. The third was potassium chloride, which stopped his heart. Donald yawned once, smacked his lips, and then stopped breathing. He was pronounced dead at 12:29 a.m. He was 61 years old. For family members of the victims watched through a glass window. About 300 protesters gathered outside the prison. They carried candles and signs against the death penalty. One supporter held a sign saying, "Bye-bye Beardsley." After the execution, the families of Patty Gedling and Stacy Benjamin returned to their lives. Ricky Soria remained in prison. Frank Rutherford had already died in prison. Bill Forrester, who was acquitted, went free. The case was closed. Donald J. Beardsley, who killed 3 women across 2 states, was the first person executed in California in 2005 and the 11th since the state resumed executions in 1992. Story 3. Troy Albert Kunkel was born on May 27, 1966. He was born in Nuremberg, Germany. His father was serving in the United States military at that time. The family lived in Germany because of his father's job. Troy was their son. When Troy was still a young child, his family moved back to the United States. They settled in San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio became Troy's hometown. He grew up there. He went to school there. He lived in San Antonio for most of his childhood and his teenage years. Troy's family had serious problems. Both of his parents suffered from mental illness. His mother's mental illness was severe. When Troy was still a baby, his mother tried to choke him. She was committed to a mental hospital because of this. Troy survived, but he lived with a mother who was not stable. His father also had mental health problems. As Troy grew older, his father's mental condition got worse. When Troy was around 12 years old, his father became violent. Troy's father would attack him. He slammed Troy's head into walls. He threw Troy against a wall so hard that Troy's spleen was bruised. His father also put Troy into life-threatening chokeholds. Troy lived in fear of his father's outbursts. Because of his parents' mental illnesses and the violence at home, Troy did not have a calm or safe childhood. He was often neglected. He did not receive proper guidance or emotional support. The home environment was turbulent and filled with abuse. At school, Troy was a problem student. He did not follow the rules. He was frequently disciplined. His school problems included truancy, which means he skipped classes without permission. He was caught smoking at school. He also disrupted his classes. Teachers had trouble managing his behavior. He did not have a prior criminal record as a juvenile, but he was known as a difficult student. Troy did not finish his teenage years with a clean record of good behavior. He began drinking alcohol and using drugs. By the time he was 17, he was using marijuana and LSD. He did not have a job that led to a stable life. He spent time with friends who also used drugs and alcohol. One of his girlfriends was named Laura Lee Zayance. She was close to his age. They spent time together in San Antonio. Troy did not have a plan for his future. He did not go to college. He did not have a career. He simply drifted from day to day, using drugs and hanging out with his companions. By August 1984, Troy was 18 years old. He had just turned 18 2.5 months earlier. He had no steady job. He had no criminal record yet. But he had a history of family violence, mental illness in his parents, drug and alcohol use, and problems at school. His life up to that point was marked by instability, abuse, and poor choices. He was living in San Antonio with no clear direction. On August 11th, 1984, Troy was with his girlfriend Laura Lee Zayance and 3 other companions. Their names were Russell Stanley, Aaron Adkins, and Tom Sauls. They decided to drive from San Antonio to Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi is a city on the coast of Texas, about 140 miles southeast of San Antonio. They planned to go to the beach. They were all under the influence of alcohol and LSD as they started that trip. The group of 5 people drove from San Antonio toward Corpus Christi. Troy Kunkel was in the car with his girlfriend Laura Lee Zayance, Russell Stanley, Aaron Adkins, and Tom Sauls. They were all drinking alcohol and had taken LSD. The drug and alcohol were affecting how they thought and acted. While they were driving on the road, Russell Stanley reached into the glove compartment of the car. He pulled out a loaded .22 caliber pistol. Stanley fired the gun into the air. Then he asked Aaron Adkins if he wanted to make some money. Tom Sauls heard this and said, "Guns and acid don't mix." Stanley put the gun back into the glove compartment. But later during the same trip, Stanley took the gun out several more times. Stanley and Adkins talked about robbing someone. They slowed the car down several times. They looked at cars parked on the side of the road. They wanted to see if they could rob the people inside those cars. Tom Sauls could hear them talking, but he did not join the conversation. The group arrived in Corpus Christi. They drove to the beach first. At the beach, Troy Kunkel and Laura Lee Zayance stayed by themselves. Stanley, Adkins, and Sauls went for a walk. While walking, Stanley and Adkins again talked about robbing someone. Sauls was there, but did not take part in the talk. After the beach, the group went to a convenience store. They wanted to buy beer. At that store, Stanley and Adkins saw a man using a payphone outside. They robbed him at gunpoint. They got $7 from that man. During this robbery, Troy Kunkel, Laura Lee Zayance, and Tom Sauls stayed in the car. They could not see the robbery happening. Sauls did not help with the robbery and did not take any of the money. The group left the store. They drove around looking for another person to rob. They saw a man walking along the road. His name was Stephen Wayne Horton. He was 31 years old. He was white. He was walking alone. Aaron Adkins drove the car next to Stephen Horton. Laura Lee Zayance asked Horton if he wanted a ride. Horton said no at first. He said he lived only a few blocks away. But the group kept asking him. Finally, Horton agreed to get into the car. He sat in the front seat next to Zayance. Once Horton was inside the car, Russell Stanley put the .22 caliber pistol against the back of Horton's head. Stanley told Horton to give them his wallet. Horton turned his head to look at Stanley. When he turned, Zayance dug her fingernails into the side of his face. She told Horton to look forward. Troy Kunkel then told Stanley to kill Horton. Stanley refused. Stanley said that killing was not necessary. He only wanted to beat Horton. Kunkel took the gun away from Stanley. He pressed the gun against Horton's head. Kunkel said, "We're going to take you back here and blow your brains out." Adkins drove the car behind a skating rink. The area behind the skating rink was dark and away from other people. Kunkel then shot Stephen Horton one time in the back of the head. Horton died from that gunshot wound. After Horton was shot, the group opened the car door. They pushed Horton's body out of the car onto the ground. Laura Lee Zayance took Horton's wallet from his body. The wallet contained $13. After the shooting, Troy Kunkel said these words, "Another day, another death, another sorrow, another breath." These were lyrics from a song called No Remorse by the heavy metal band Metallica. The song was on an album called Kill 'Em All. Later, Kunkel also said that the murder was beautiful. Tom Sauls became very scared. He said he freaked out on the whole thing. He sat in the car scared. Sauls complained and said they did not have to kill Horton. In response, Stanley pointed the gun at Saul's head and told him to shut up or he would be shot too. Saul stopped talking. He stared out the window for the rest of the drive back to San Antonio. The others acted like nothing had happened. When they returned to San Antonio, all five spent the night in the same place. The next day, they went to Canyon Lake together. Sauls went with them because he thought it would look strange if he did not go. He also felt that the others were keeping an eye on him, so he would not go to the police. Sauls was afraid to call the police. At that time, no one reported the murder right away. Police had not yet found Stephen Horton's body. No arrests had been made. No investigation had started. The group continued their normal activities. Troy Kunkel showed no signs of remorse. He quoted the song lyrics again to his friends. He told them the killing was beautiful. Stephen Horton's body was found on August 12, 1984. A Corpus Christi police officer named Ed Wimberly was working that day. He found Horton's body lying in a field behind the skating rink. Horton had been shot once in the back of the head. His wallet was missing. The police began an investigation. The police did not have immediate suspects. They did not know who had killed Horton, but they started asking questions in the area. They also looked for anyone who might have seen something unusual behind the skating rink. Meanwhile, Tom Sauls was still afraid. He had seen the whole crime. He knew that Kunkel had shot Horton. He knew that the others had helped. Sauls did not go to the police right away because he was scared. He was afraid that Stanley or Kunkel would hurt him if he talked. Later, police officers from Austin contacted Tom Sauls. It is not clear from the records exactly how the police found Sauls, but once they contacted him, Sauls decided to tell them everything. He described the trip from San Antonio to Corpus Christi. He described the robbery at the convenience store. He described how the group picked up Stephen Horton. He described how Kunkel took the gun, said he would blow Horton's brains out, and then shot Horton in the head. He described how they pushed the body out of the car and took the wallet. He also described how Stanley threatened to shoot him when he complained. After Sauls gave his statement, the police had enough information to make arrests. They arrested Troy Kunkel. They also arrested Laura Lee Zayance, Russell Stanley, and Aaron Adkins. All four were charged with crimes related to the murder of Stephen Horton. On October 17, 1984, a grand jury in Nueces County, Texas, indicted Troy Kunkel for capital murder. Capital murder means murder committed during another serious crime. In this case, the other crime was robbery. Kunkel had shot Horton while taking his wallet. The trial for Troy Kunkel began in February 1985. The prosecutor was Leslie Pointer Dixon. During the trial, the jury heard testimony from Tom Sauls and other witnesses. They heard how Kunkel had taken the gun and shot Horton. They heard that Kunkel had quoted the Metallica song lyrics after the killing. At one point during the trial, the judge had to decide whether the song lyrics could be admitted as evidence. As the judge listened to the Metallica album, Kunkel pretended to play an air guitar in the courtroom. On February 22, 1985, the jury found Troy Kunkel guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide whether Kunkel would receive the death penalty or life in prison. The jury answered yes to two special questions: whether Kunkel had caused Horton's death deliberately, and whether he would be a continuing threat to society. On March 1, 1985, the court sentenced Troy Kunkel to death by lethal injection. The other three accomplices received different sentences. Laura Lee Zayance was convicted of capital murder. She received a life sentence. Russell Stanley and Aaron Adkins were convicted of murder, not capital murder. Each of them received a sentence of 30 years in prison. Kunkel appealed his conviction and death sentence. On June 18, 1986, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction and sentence. Kunkel then filed more appeals over many years. He filed state habeas corpus petitions and federal habeas corpus petitions. He asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review his case multiple times. The Supreme Court denied his requests in 1989, 1993, and 2004. Kunkel's lawyers argued that the jury had not been allowed to consider mitigating evidence. They wanted the jury to hear about his abusive childhood, his parents' mental illness, and his drug and alcohol use at the time of the crime. But the courts ruled against him on procedural grounds. Some jurors later said they would have voted for life in prison if they had known about his background. But the courts did not grant a new sentencing hearing. While Kunkel was on death row, he told reporters that he had changed. He said prison ministers had helped him. He said he thought about his victim every day. He called his crime a juvenile mistake made with juvenile peer pressure. He said he hoped to be forgiven. Kunkel was scheduled to be executed several times. Twice in 2004, courts stopped his execution on the very day it was supposed to happen. The U.S. Supreme Court issued a stay in July 2004 and again in November 2004. But in December 2004, the Supreme Court lifted the stay. A new execution date was set for January 25, 2005. On January 25, 2005, Troy Kunkel was taken to the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was 38 years old. He had spent more than half of his life on death row. His final meal was fried chicken, chicken fried steak, a hamburger with cheese and onions, French fries, cauliflower, cinnamon rolls, apple pie, and milk. Before the lethal injection was given, Kunkel made a final statement. He looked toward the daughter and son-in-law of Stephen Horton, who were watching through a window. He said, "I would like to ask you to forgive me. I made a mistake, and I am sorry for what I did. All I can do is ask you to forgive me. I love you, and I will see all of you in heaven. I love you very much. Praise Jesus. I love you." He then recited the Lord's Prayer. As the drugs began to flow, he mouthed the words, "I love you," repeatedly to his mother and his wife. At 8:12 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Stephen Horton's family witnessed the execution. His daughter and son-in-law were there. After the execution, Kunkel's wife said, "Shame to Texas." The other accomplices did not spend as much time in prison. Russell Stanley served 6 years of his 30-year sentence and was paroled in July 1990. Aaron Adkins was paroled in February 1991. Laura Lee Zayance remained in prison for a longer time, serving a life sentence for capital murder. The case of Troy Kunkel became known as the No Remorse Murder, but in his final moments, he asked for forgiveness. The story of Troy Kunkel ends with his death by lethal injection on January 25, 2005, 20 years and 5 months after he shot Stephen Horton in the back of the head for $13. Story 4. Timothy Don Carr was born on May 30, 1970. He was a white male. He was born in the state of Georgia in the United States. His family lived in and around Monroe County, Georgia. Timothy's family had many problems. His father drank alcohol too much. The father drank almost every day. When the father drank, he became angry and violent. He would hit Timothy. He would also hit Timothy's mother. The father did this many times over many years. The violence was not just hitting. Timothy's father also sexually abused him. This abuse started when Timothy was very young. It happened many times. Timothy did not tell anyone about the abuse. He was scared. He thought no one would believe him. He also thought the abuse was his own fault. Timothy's mother also had problems. She had mental illness. The family did not get her help for this illness. Timothy's other family members also had mental illness and problems with alcohol. This meant Timothy grew up in a home that was not safe. He did not have adults who could take care of him properly. When Timothy was born, there was a problem with his birth. He suffered a brain injury. This injury affected how his brain worked. He did not learn the same way other children learned. He had trouble controlling his emotions. He sometimes acted without thinking about what would happen next. Even with all these problems, Timothy did some good things as he grew up. One time, his father was in danger of dying. Timothy saved his father's life. He acted quickly and helped his father. This showed that Timothy could care about other people. But the abuse in his home did not stop. Timothy went to school like other children. He had friends. He was not known as a violent person. He did not get into fights. He did not have a criminal record as a teenager. Most people who knew him thought he was a normal young man. As Timothy became older, he started using alcohol and drugs. He drank beer and liquor. He smoked marijuana. He also tried hallucinogenic mushrooms. These are drugs that make a person see and hear things that are not real. Timothy used these drugs more and more often. He used them to feel better. He used them to forget the bad things that happened to him at home. When Timothy was a young man, he met a girl named Melissa Bergson. She became his girlfriend. They spent a lot of time together. They went to parties together. They used drugs and alcohol together. Melissa had a strong personality. She often told Timothy what to do. Timothy listened to her. He wanted to make her happy. By the time Timothy was 22 years old, he had no job that paid well. He did not have his own home. He spent most of his time with Melissa and with friends who also used drugs. He had not received any real help for the abuse he suffered as a child. He had not received treatment for his mental illness. He did not know how to stop using drugs or control his anger when it came up. One night in October 1992, Timothy went to a party with Melissa. Other people were at the party too. One of them was a 17-year-old boy named Keith Patrick Young. That night, things would change forever. The party happened on the evening of October 8th, 1992. Timothy Carr went to the party with his girlfriend Melissa Bergson. The victim, 17-year-old Keith Patrick Young, was also at the same party. Other people at the party included two juveniles, a boy and a girl, both 16 years old. At the party, everyone drank alcohol. They also used drugs. They smoked marijuana. They drank tea made from boiled hallucinogenic mushrooms. These mushrooms made people feel confused and see things that were not real. Timothy consumed a large amount of these mushrooms. He was very intoxicated. While at the party, Timothy and Melissa talked together. They discussed robbing Keith Young. Keith had just cashed his paycheck. He had money in his pocket. He also had a car, a gold 1986 Pontiac Grand Prix. Timothy and Melissa wanted the money and the car. They made a plan to take both. Later that night, Melissa took Keith's car keys. She told Keith he was too drunk to drive. Keith agreed to let Melissa drive him home. Keith got into the front passenger seat. Melissa sat in the driver's seat. Timothy and the two juveniles sat in the back seat. Melissa then drove the car away from the party. Melissa did not drive toward Keith's home. Instead, she drove to a different place. She drove to a remote area in South Monroe County, Georgia. This area was far from other houses and roads. It was a dirt road with no lights and no people nearby. During the car ride, Timothy showed a large knife to one of the juveniles. He whispered to her that he intended to kill Keith Young. There was also a baseball bat in the back seat of the car. Timothy had access to this bat. Melissa stopped the car on the dirt road. She told everyone to get out. She said they were going to look for more mushrooms. Keith got out of the car. Timothy got out. The two juveniles got out. Only the female juvenile stayed inside the car. Keith walked to the trunk of the car. He opened the trunk. He was looking for more drugs. While Keith's back was turned, Melissa looked at Timothy. She motioned to him. She whispered, "Do it now." This was a signal for Timothy to kill Keith. Timothy moved behind Keith. He grabbed Keith's hair. He pulled Keith's head back. Then Timothy took the large knife and slashed Keith's throat. He cut the throat not once but twice. Blood came out. Keith fell down. But Melissa was not satisfied. She said that ain't enough. She urged Timothy to keep hurting Keith. Timothy obeyed. He took the knife and stabbed Keith in the chest many times. Keith was still alive. He begged for his life. He pleaded with Timothy to stop. Timothy did not stop. He laughed at Keith. He said, "I'm going to kill you, boy." Then Timothy rolled Keith over onto his stomach. He stabbed Keith several more times in the lower back. Keith was still breathing. The male juvenile then handed the baseball bat to Timothy. Timothy took the bat. He beat Keith in the head with the bat. He hit the head and the face many times. Keith's skull fractured from the blows. After Timothy finished beating Keith, Melissa went to Keith's body. She reached into his pockets. She took his money. The money was from his paycheck. She gave some of it to Timothy, or kept it herself. Then Timothy and the male juvenile dragged Keith's body to the side of the dirt road. They left him there. Keith was still alive when they left him. He died later from his injuries. The cause of death was the cut throat, the stab wounds, and the blows to the head. After leaving Keith on the road, Melissa drove the group back to Macon. They dropped off the male juvenile. Then Melissa, Timothy, and the female juvenile drove away in Keith's car. They drove to the state of Tennessee. They planned to hide there. At the time of the crime, no police were present. No one saw the murder happen except Timothy, Melissa, and the two juveniles. The two juveniles did not stop the murder. They did not call for help. They stayed with Timothy and Melissa. Later that night, Keith's body was still on the side of the dirt road. No one had found him yet. The next day, someone would discover him. The next day, someone found Keith Patrick Young's body on the side of the dirt road in South Monroe County, Georgia. That person called the police. Officers from the Monroe County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene. They saw the injuries on Keith's body. They saw the blood. They knew he had been killed by another person. The police began to investigate. They talked to people who had been at the party. They learned that Timothy Carr, Melissa Bergson, and two juveniles had left the party with Keith in his car. The police also learned that Keith's car was missing. They issued a lookout for the gold Pontiac Grand Prix. Meanwhile, Timothy Carr, Melissa Bergson, and the female juvenile drove Keith's car to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. They thought they had escaped, but police in Tennessee spotted the car. The officers recognized it from the lookout. They tried to stop the car. Timothy was driving at that time. Timothy did not stop. He sped away. A high-speed chase began. Police cars followed Timothy on the roads. Timothy drove very fast. He tried to lose the police, but he crashed the car. The chase ended. Police surrounded the car and arrested Timothy, Melissa, and the female juvenile. The three were taken to a local hospital. They received medical treatment for minor injuries from the crash. After treatment, police put Timothy and Melissa into the back of a police car. The police had hidden a tape recorder inside that car. The recorder was already turned on. Timothy and Melissa did not know they were being recorded. Inside the police car, Timothy and Melissa talked to each other. Timothy admitted that he killed Keith Young. He described how he cut Keith's throat and stabbed him. The hidden tape recorder captured all of these statements. Later, this recording was used as evidence in court. Police also searched Melissa's purse. Inside the purse, they found the large knife that Timothy had used to stab Keith. The knife had blood on it. Forensic tests matched the blood to Keith Young. The two juveniles were also arrested. Their cases were handled in juvenile court because they were 16 years old at the time of the crime. One juvenile was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention. The other juvenile was found guilty only of theft. She was ordered to receive counseling. Neither juvenile went to adult prison. Melissa Bergson was tried first in adult court. Timothy Carr testified at her trial. He told the truth about what happened. He said Melissa planned the robbery. He said she motioned to him to kill Keith. He said she urged him to keep stabbing Keith. The prosecutor called Melissa the moving force behind the crime. He called Timothy her puppet. The jury found Melissa guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. 2 months later, Timothy Carr was tried. His trial started on April 18, 1994, in Monroe County Superior Court. The prosecutor changed his story. Now he said Timothy was the main person responsible for the murder. He said Melissa did not stab Keith. He told the jury not to believe Timothy's claims about being drunk or influenced by Melissa. The jury heard the hidden tape recording of Timothy admitting the murder. They heard testimony from the 2 juveniles. They saw the knife found in Melissa's purse. On April 27, 1994, the jury found Timothy guilty of malice murder, theft of a motor vehicle, and other charges. The next day, April 28, 1994, the same jury recommended the death penalty. The judge sentenced Timothy to death. Timothy appealed his case many times. In 1997, the Georgia Supreme Court affirmed his conviction and death sentence. In 2000, a state court granted him relief, but the Georgia Supreme Court reversed that decision in 2001 and reinstated the death sentence. He appealed to federal court. In 2004, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals denied his claim. On December 13, 2004, the United States Supreme Court refused to hear his case. On January 24, 2005, the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles held a clemency hearing. Timothy's family asked the board to spare his life. They presented evidence about his abusive childhood and mental illness. The board denied clemency. On January 25, 2005, at 7:05 p.m., Timothy Don Carr was led to the execution chamber at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia. He was given a final meal: 2 mushroom and Swiss hamburgers, a vanilla milkshake, a chocolate milkshake, and 2 soft drinks. He was asked if he had any last words. He said peace. Earlier, from his holding cell, he apologized for his crime and said it was time for justice to be done. At 8:37 p.m., the lethal injection was completed, and Timothy Don Carr was pronounced dead. Melissa Bergson remains in prison serving her life sentence. The 2 juveniles completed their sentences and were released. Keith Patrick Young's mother and grandfather witnessed the execution. After it was over, his mother said her son was in heaven. The case was closed. The story of Timothy Don Carr ends with his death by lethal injection on January 25, 2005, at the age of 34. Story 5. Dennis Wayne Bagwell was born on December 27, 1963, in Denver, Colorado. He was a white male. His mother's name was Leona McBee. His father is not clearly named in the records. Dennis grew up in different places. He lived in the Rio Grande Valley area of Texas and also in the Dallas area. When Dennis was a child, his home life was not stable. He did not have good supervision. His stepfather drank alcohol too much. The stepfather would beat Dennis. Dennis was also forced to sleep in the same room as his mother while she had sex with her partner. This was a very harmful experience for a child. His stepfather also made Dennis and his sister sit and stare at a blank television screen for many hours at a time. This was a form of punishment and control. These events happened during his early years and teenage years. As a young man, Dennis began to break the law. On September 27, 1982, when he was 18 years old, he was sentenced to prison for attempted capital murder. This happened in Hidalgo County, Texas. In that crime, he robbed a person who was an undocumented immigrant. He also cut that person's throat. He received a sentence of 18 years in state prison. He began serving that sentence in October 1982. Dennis was released on parole in October 1989. He did not stay out of trouble. In September 1992, he was sent back to prison because he broke the rules of his parole. He was released on parole again in January 1993. At that time, the state of Texas had to let some prisoners out early because a federal judge had placed a limit on how many prisoners could be held. So Dennis was free again while still on parole. While on parole, Dennis lived a rough life. He used cocaine often. He became addicted to cocaine. He had a girlfriend named Victoria Wolford. People who knew him said he made many threats of violence. He had trouble following rules. He refused to take psychiatric treatment even when he was offered help. Dennis had a job at one point as a meat salesman, but his life was not steady. He moved from place to place. He and his girlfriend Victoria lived in a small travel trailer. They parked this trailer on property that belonged to his mother, Leona McBee, and her common-law husband, Ron Boone. This property was in Wilson County, Texas, near the town of Stockdale. On that property, there was also a mobile home where Leona, Ron, and other family members lived. About 2 weeks before a major event happened, Leona asked Dennis and Victoria to stop living on her property. She wanted them to leave. So Dennis and Victoria moved out. They went to San Antonio and stayed with friends. The travel trailer they had been living in stayed on the property. Dennis was not happy about this situation. He told people he was frustrated. He said his mother had not paid him for the travel trailer. He also said something to his former stepmother 2 days before the next major event. He said he could kill his mother and it would never bother him. This was a statement he made out loud to another person. At this point in Dennis's life, he was 31 years old. He was on parole for a violent crime. He used cocaine. He had a girlfriend who stayed with him. He had been kicked off his mother's property. He had no stable home. He had a history of violence and threats. He had told people he could kill his mother without feeling bad. He was living with friends in San Antonio, but he still had access to the travel trailer on his mother's land. He had a hammer. He had access to guns. He was angry, and he was using drugs. That was the state of Dennis Wayne Bagwell's life in September 1995. On September 20th, 1995, Dennis Wayne Bagwell was in San Antonio with his girlfriend, Victoria Wolford. They decided to drive to his mother's house in Wilson County. The reason they went was to borrow money. Bagwell wanted cash from his mother, Leona McBee. They arrived at the property. On the property was the mobile home where Leona lived with her common-law husband, Ron Boone. Also living in that mobile home were 3 other people. One was Libby Best, who was Bagwell's half-sister. She was 24 years old. Another was Libby's daughter, Reba Best. Reba was only 4 years old. The third person was Tassie Boone, who was Ron Boone's granddaughter. Tassie was 14 years old. When Bagwell and Victoria arrived, Victoria had a headache. She went into the small travel trailer that was still parked on the property. She lay down to rest. Bagwell went alone into the mobile home to talk to his mother. A short time later, Bagwell came out of the mobile home and walked to the travel trailer. He told Victoria that his mother would only give him $20. He was not happy with this amount. Then he went back into the mobile home. Victoria got up from the travel trailer. She stood outside it. From where she stood, she could see through a window into the mobile home. Through that window, she saw Bagwell strike his mother, Leona. Then Victoria heard screams. She also heard 2 popping noises. Those popping noises were gunshots. Then Victoria heard Tassie Boone yell, "No, no." She heard the little girl, Reba Best, scream. After that, everything was quiet for a short while. Then Victoria heard Leona yell at the dogs. She heard Leona gasp for air. Through the window, Victoria saw Bagwell hit his mother again. This time he used a long-handled gun as a club. Later, Bagwell came out of the mobile home. He took some towels. He wet the towels with a water hose. He wiped off a hammer with the wet towels. He told Victoria that he was going to go back inside to wipe off any fingerprints he might have left in the house. He also told Victoria that he was trying to make the crime look like a robbery and a rape of Tassie Boone. He wanted the police to think someone else had done it. The 4 people inside the mobile home were all dead. They had been killed in different ways. Leona McBee, 47 years old, was Bagwell's mother. She had been beaten many times on her body. She had also been strangled. Her neck was broken from the strangling. Libby Best, 24 years old, was Bagwell's half-sister. She had been shot twice in the head. The bullets killed her. Tassie Boone, 14 years old, was not related to Bagwell by blood. She was the granddaughter of Ron Boone. She had been beaten. She had been strangled. Her neck was also broken. She had also been sexually assaulted. Bagwell had done all of these things to her. Reba Best, 4 years old, was Libby Best's daughter. She was Bagwell's niece. She had been beaten on her head, neck, and upper back. The object used was a blunt object. Later, the medical examiner would identify the weapons used in all these killings. They included a claw hammer, the neck of a guitar, a spring from an exercise machine, and a broken .22 caliber rifle. At least one of the victims had also been stomped on with feet. The little girl's skull was crushed from the beating. Bagwell used multiple methods on multiple people. He beat. He strangled. He shot. He stomped. He sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl. He did all of this inside the mobile home where his mother and the others lived. He did it because he was angry about only getting $20. He also wanted to make it look like a robbery and a rape to hide his own actions. After Bagwell cleaned the hammer and wiped for fingerprints, he and Victoria left the property. They did not call for help. They did not tell anyone what had happened. They drove away. Later that same day, Ronald Boone came home from work. Ron was Leona's common-law husband. He walked into the mobile home. He found the bodies of Leona, Libby, Reba, and Tassie. All 4 were dead. He saw the blood. He saw the injuries. He called the police. That was how the crime was first discovered by someone outside of Bagwell and Victoria. At the time the bodies were found, the police started to ask questions. They saw that the scene was very violent. They saw that more than one weapon had been used. They saw that a child was killed. They saw signs that someone had tried to clean up some items. They collected evidence from the house. But at this point, they did not yet know who had done it. They did not immediately arrest Bagwell. They began their work by looking at the scene and talking to people who knew the family. When Ronald Boone found the 4 bodies on September 20th, 1995, he called the Wilson County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived at the mobile home. They saw the violence immediately. They called for investigators and crime scene experts. The police began to collect evidence from inside the house. They took photographs. They lifted fingerprints. They looked for shoe prints. They collected the weapons, a claw hammer, a broken rifle, parts of an exercise machine, and a guitar neck. One key piece of evidence was a bloody shoe print. This print was found on the floor underneath the body of Tassie Boone. The police made a record of that print. They also found that some items had been wiped clean, but not everything was cleaned well enough. The police started to ask questions about who might have wanted to hurt the family. They learned that Leona McBee had asked her son, Dennis Bagwell, to leave the property about 2 weeks earlier. They learned that Bagwell had been living in a travel trailer on the same land. They learned that Bagwell had a criminal record. He was on parole for attempted capital murder from 1982. They also learned that Bagwell had been seen in the area on the day of the murders. The police talked to Victoria Wolford, Bagwell's girlfriend. At first, she may not have told everything, but as the investigation continued, she decided to speak. She told the police what she had seen through the window. She described how Bagwell hit his mother, how she heard screams and gunshots, and how Bagwell later cleaned a hammer and talked about making the crime look like a robbery and rape. Victoria also led police to locations where Bagwell had thrown away evidence. The police recovered a pair of tennis shoes and a pair of shorts based on her information. The tennis shoes matched the bloody shoe print found under Tassie Boone's body. Experts confirmed the match. The police also found a broken .22 caliber rifle. A firearms expert matched bullet fragments from Libby Best's head to that rifle. The evidence connected Bagwell directly to the murders. On November 21, 1995, a grand jury in Wilson County indicted Dennis Wayne Bagwell for capital murder. The charge was for killing more than one person during the same criminal event. Because the case had received a lot of attention, the judge granted a change of venue. The trial was moved from Wilson County to Atascosa County. This was done to find a jury that had not already made up its mind. Before the trial started, the prosecution asked the judge to have Bagwell put in leg restraints during the trial. They told the judge that Bagwell had made many threats against law enforcement officers. He had said he would take one of you out before we hit the floor. The judge agreed. Bagwell wore leg restraints under his clothing throughout the trial. The jury could not see them because his legs were covered and hidden. The trial began in October 1996. The prosecution called Victoria Wolford as their main witness. She had been given immunity from prosecution, which meant she would not be charged for her role in the events. She told the jury everything she saw and heard. The prosecution also called police officers, fingerprint experts, shoe print experts, and a firearms expert. They showed the jury the bloody shoe print match. They showed the bullet match. They showed the hammer and the broken rifle. The defense tried to suggest that someone else had committed the murders. They pointed to Tassie Boone's mother, Monica Boone, as a possible killer. But the prosecution proved that Monica Boone was in California on the day of the murders. The defense also said Bagwell was too affected by cocaine to know what he was doing. But the evidence of planning and cleaning up did not support that claim. Bagwell did not testify in his own defense. His lawyers decided that if he testified, the prosecution could bring up his long criminal history, including the 1982 attempted capital murder. That would make him look worse to the jury. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. On November 1, 1996, they found Dennis Wayne Bagwell guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide between life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecution presented more evidence. They showed that Bagwell had a prior conviction for attempted capital murder. They showed he had been on parole at the time of these murders. They showed he had a history of violence in prison. They also showed that he had committed another murder just 2 weeks before killing his mother and the others. That victim was George Berry, a 63-year-old janitor at a bar in Seguin, Texas. Bagwell had stomped Berry to death during a robbery. The jury learned that Bagwell had already been convicted of that murder separately and had received a life sentence. The prosecution argued that Bagwell would always be dangerous. The defense asked for life in prison. They called Bagwell's ex-wife and his former parole officer to speak for him. But the jury was not convinced. They deliberated for 4 hours. On November 7, 1996, the jury sentenced Dennis Wayne Bagwell to death. After the sentence, Bagwell appealed. He took his case to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On March 31, 1999, that court affirmed his conviction and death sentence. He then filed a state habeas corpus petition, which is a request to review whether his imprisonment was legal. The state court denied relief on September 29, 1999. He then took his case to federal court. On August 19, 2003, a federal district court denied his petition. He asked the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for permission to appeal, but that court denied him on May 11, 2004. He then asked the U.S. Supreme Court to hear his case. On November 14, 2004, the Supreme Court declined to review it. All appeals were exhausted. While on death row, Bagwell was also convicted for the murder of George Barry, the janitor. He received a life sentence for that crime. That conviction did not change his death sentence for the 4 murders. On February 17, 2005, Dennis Wayne Bagwell was executed by lethal injection at the state prison in Huntsville, Texas. His last meal was large: beef steak with A1 sauce, 3 fried chicken breasts, 3 fried chicken thighs, barbecue ribs, a large order of French fries, a large order of onion rings, a pound of fried bacon, a dozen scrambled eggs with onions, fried potatoes with onions, sliced tomatoes, a salad with ranch dressing, 2 hamburgers with everything, peach cobbler, ketchup, salt and pepper, milk, coffee, and iced tea with real sugar. His final words did not admit guilt. He thanked a spiritual advisor and said, "I love you all," to the people he had invited to watch. He did not look at the relatives of his victims. He was pronounced dead at 6:19 p.m. The relatives of the victims, including Monica Boone, Tassie's mother, and Gregory Knowles, Libby Beth's father, said after the execution that they were glad it was over. Dennis Wayne Bagwell was the 339th person executed in Texas since 1976, and the 3rd person executed in Texas in 2005. The case was closed. Story 6. Stephen Anthony Mobley was born on July 13, 1965. He was a white male. People who knew him often called him Tony. He grew up in the state of Georgia in the United States. His family had trouble dealing with him from a young age. He did not have an easy childhood. When Stephen was a child, he showed signs of emotional and behavioral problems. He had trouble following rules at home and at school. His family tried to help him, but they could not control his actions. Because of his behavior, Stephen was placed in 10 different residential programs. These were places where troubled children and teenagers were sent to live and receive treatment. He moved from one placement to another many times. He did not stay in one home for a long period during these years. As a teenager, Stephen started committing small crimes. Between 1983 and 1986, he was convicted of at least 7 different offenses. Some of these crimes included credit card theft and burglary. Burglary means breaking into a building to steal things. These convictions happened before he turned 21 years old. Stephen did not finish his education in a normal way. His behavior problems made it hard for him to stay in regular schools. He did not have a stable job history when he became a young adult. In his late teens and early 20s, Stephen continued to have conflicts with other people. He did not have a steady social life. He spent time with people who also committed crimes. He did not have a long-term girlfriend or a close group of law-abiding friends. By the time he was 25 years old, Stephen had already spent time in jail or prison for his earlier crimes. He had been released. He lived in Georgia. He did not have a legal job that paid him regularly. He did not own a home. He moved between different places to stay. In early 1991, Stephen got hold of a small handgun. It was a Walther .380 semi-automatic pistol. He did not buy this gun legally. He took it from someone he knew. He kept the gun with him. Stephen's relationship with his family was difficult, but he still saw them sometimes. His parents and his sister knew he had problems. They tried to help him, but he did not change his behavior. In the weeks before the events that would come next, Stephen had no stable daily routine. He stayed up late at night. He drove around in his car. He needed money. He did not want to work a normal job. He thought about robbing places to get cash. On the night of February 16, 1991, Stephen left his residence. He got into his car. He told people later that he was driving to a family member's home. That family member was not expecting him at a specific time. He had multiple routes he could take to reach that house. One of the possible routes passed by a pizza store. That store was a Domino's Pizza. It was located in Oakwood, in Hall County, Georgia. The store stayed open late. It was close to midnight. Stephen chose the route that went past the pizza store. That route was more than 10 miles longer than the shortest route to the family member's house. But he drove that longer way anyway. He arrived near the Domino's Pizza store shortly after midnight. The time was now February 17th, 1991. The store was still open. The lights were on. Stephen stopped his car. He had the stolen pistol with him. He got out of the car. He walked toward the store's entrance. Stephen Mobley walked through the front door of the Domino's Pizza store in Oakwood, Georgia. The time was shortly after midnight on February 17th, 1991. Inside the store, only one person was working. That person was John C. Collins. John was 24 years old. He was the store manager. He was a white male. John Collins was alone. He was doing his normal closing duties. He did not know Stephen Mobley. There was no relationship between them. They had never met before that night. Stephen Mobley pulled out the Walther .380 semi-automatic pistol he had stolen from an acquaintance. He pointed the gun at John Collins. He demanded money. He told John to open the cash register. John Collins did what Stephen told him to do. He opened the cash register. Stephen took all the money from the register. Then Stephen demanded more money. He told John to open the back office area. John walked to the back office. Stephen followed him. John opened the office. Stephen took money from that location as well. After Stephen had taken all the cash from the register in the office, he did not leave. Instead, he ordered John Collins to get down on his knees. John was scared. He obeyed. He knelt on the floor. He was facing away from Stephen. Stephen Mobley then raised the pistol. He placed it near the back of John Collins's head. He pulled the trigger. The gun fired one shot. The bullet entered the back of John Collins's head. John fell to the floor. He died very quickly. He did not move again. Stephen Mobley left the store. He got back into his car. He drove away from the scene. He had the stolen money with him. He did not call for help. He did not tell anyone what he had done. He went on with his life as if nothing had happened. The physical evidence at the scene later showed that John Collins had been shot while he was on his knees. That matched exactly what Stephen would later tell another person. After killing John Collins, Stephen Mobley did not stop committing crimes. Over the next 3 weeks, he robbed 6 more businesses. All of these robberies were armed robberies. He used the same Walther .380 pistol in each one. He robbed restaurants and dry cleaning shops. He walked into each business, pointed the gun, and demanded cash. Stephen committed these robberies in different locations. He did not wear a disguise each time. He simply walked in, showed the gun, took the money, and left. The people working in those stores were scared. Some of them thought they might be shot like John Collins. But Stephen did not shoot anyone else during those 6 robberies. He only took the money and left. Approximately 3 weeks after the murder of John Collins, Stephen Mobley attempted another robbery. This time he went to a dry cleaning store. He walked in with the same pistol. He demanded money. But something went wrong. Stephen realized that a car was following him. The car was an unmarked police car. The police had not yet connected him to the Domino's murder, but they had become suspicious of him for other reasons. When Stephen saw the unmarked police car, he tried to get rid of the evidence. He was driving his own car. He reached for the pistol. He threw it out the window of his car. The gun landed on the side of the road. He thought that if the police stopped him, they would not find the gun. The police did not stop him immediately. Instead, a high-speed chase began. Stephen drove his car very fast. He tried to escape. The police chased him. Eventually, the chase ended. The police caught Stephen and arrested him. He was taken into custody. After the arrest, the police searched the area along the road where Stephen had thrown the pistol. They found the gun. It was the same Walther .380 semi-automatic pistol he had stolen and used in the Domino's robbery and murder. The police questioned Stephen Mobley. He made statements to them. He confessed to robbing the Domino's pizza store. He also confessed to shooting and killing John Collins. He told the police what he had done. He did not show sadness or regret during these statements. Stephen was placed in jail to wait for his trial. While he was in jail, he did several strange things. He had the word Domino tattooed on his back. He took a Domino's pizza box and hung it on the wall of his cell. He also carried a domino piece in his pocket. The domino piece had the same dot pattern that Domino's Pizza used as its logo. Stephen spoke to guards and other inmates about the murder. He told one guard that he wished the guard had been at the Domino's store instead of that other boy. He was referring to John Collins. He told another person that if the victim had not started crying, he would never have shot him. He told another guard that he was going to apply for the night manager job at Domino's because he knew they needed one. He told another guard that the guard was beginning to look more and more like a Domino's pizza boy every day. Stephen also told a guard that anywhere he was put in jail, he would kill anybody he came in contact with. He then forcibly sodomized his cellmate on 2 separate occasions while in pretrial detention. At this point, Stephen Mobley was in jail. The police had his confession. They had the murder weapon. They had evidence from the crime scene. But the trial had not yet happened. The case was moving toward the court system. Stephen Mobley remained in jail after his arrest. The police already had his confession. They had the gun. They had his statements. The case moved forward to the court system. The Hall County Grand Jury met on March 19, 1991. They looked at the evidence. They decided there was enough proof to formally charge Stephen Mobley. They issued an indictment. This meant Stephen would stand trial for the murder of John Collins and for the robberies. Stephen's first trial began in February 1992. The court heard evidence, but the trial did not finish. A problem happened. The judge had to declare a mistrial. That meant the trial stopped before a verdict. The case had to be tried again later. Almost 2 years passed. A second trial began on February 7, 1994. The court was in Hall County, Georgia. The jury heard all the facts. They heard that Stephen confessed to the murder. They heard that he shot John Collins in the back of the head while John was on his knees. They heard about the 6 other robberies. They heard about the tattoo, the pizza box on the wall, and the domino piece in his pocket. They also heard that he had threatened guards and assaulted his cellmate. The jury deliberated. On February 16, 1994, they found Stephen Mobley guilty. The charges included malice murder, felony murder, armed robbery, 3 counts of aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during a crime. The trial then moved to the sentencing phase. The jury had to decide if Stephen would receive life in prison or the death penalty. They considered the aggravating circumstance. The law said that if a murder happened during an armed robbery, the death penalty was allowed. The jury voted. On February 20, 1994, they recommended the death sentence. The trial judge formally imposed the death sentence on February 28, 1994. Stephen Mobley was sent to death row at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia. Stephen did not accept the sentence quietly. He filed an appeal. His lawyers argued that mistakes were made at trial. The Georgia Supreme Court heard the case. On March 17, 1995, they affirmed the conviction and the death sentence. That meant they agreed the trial was correct. Stephen then asked the United States Supreme Court to hear his case. On October 30, 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear it. Stephen then filed a state habeas corpus petition. This is a legal way for a prisoner to argue that he is being held illegally. A judge in Butts County, Georgia, heard the case. On October 13, 1997, that judge agreed with Stephen on one point. The judge said Stephen's lawyer did a bad job during the sentencing phase. The judge vacated the death sentence. That meant the death sentence was removed. Stephen would get a new sentencing hearing. But the state of Georgia appealed that decision. The Georgia Supreme Court reversed the lower court on July 15, 1998. They reinstated the death sentence. Stephen was back on death row. Stephen then filed a federal habeas corpus petition in United States District Court. That court denied relief on May 25, 2000. He appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. On October 4, 2001, the 11th Circuit denied relief. He asked the U.S. Supreme Court to hear his case again. On June 28, 2002, the Supreme Court refused again. Stephen filed more motions. He asked for a new trial. The trial court denied that on July 19, 2002. The Georgia Supreme Court denied his appeal on August 1, 2002. He filed a federal motion for a new habeas hearing. That was denied on August 3, 2002. The 11th Circuit granted him a temporary stay of execution in August 2002 to wait for a ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court on a different case. That case did not help Stephen. The 11th Circuit finally affirmed the denial of relief on April 26, 2004. Stephen made one last attempt. He filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court on August 16, 2004. On January 18, 2005, the Supreme Court denied that petition. No more appeals were left. The state of Georgia set an execution date. Stephen would die by lethal injection on March 1, 2005. At 7 p.m. Stephen's lawyers asked the State Board of Pardons and Paroles for clemency. They argued that the victim's family did not want Stephen to be executed. John Collins's mother, Nina Collins, and two of his sisters asked the board to spare Stephen's life. The prosecutor from the trial also wrote a letter supporting the family's wishes. 6 of the 10 jurors from the trial signed affidavits asking the board to spare Stephen. The board held a hearing on February 25, 2005. After more than 3 hours of deliberation, the board denied clemency. On March 1, 2005, the execution was scheduled to happen at 7 p.m. Stephen ate his final meal. He requested steak, French fries, 1 quart of butter pecan ice cream, 1 quart of chocolate chip ice cream, and 2 soft drinks. He ate the meal. Just before 7 p.m., a federal court issued a brief stay of execution. That meant the execution could not happen immediately. But within half an hour, the court ended the stay. The execution could proceed. 6 guards led Stephen Mobley into the execution chamber. They strapped him down to a table. Stephen was smiling and laughing. He talked with the warden. 2 nurses inserted needles into his arms. Stephen watched the procedure closely. 2 of his friends were witnesses in the witness room. 1 friend waved to him. Stephen smiled and mouthed the words, "Thank you." The warden asked Stephen if he wanted to make a final statement. Stephen gave a lengthy statement. He said he would be remiss not to acknowledge and make amends to his family and friends. He said there were those who say he is a bigger person than he used to be, and he appreciated that. He said he atoned for what sins he committed. The warden then asked if he wanted a last prayer. Stephen said, "Absolutely." A prayer was said. After the prayer, the fatal chemicals were injected into Stephen's veins. Stephen Anthony Mobley was pronounced dead at 8 p.m. on March 1, 2005. He was 39 years old. John Collins's family did not attend the execution. They had opposed the death penalty for Stephen. They had asked the state to spare his life. After the execution, they continued to live with their loss. John Collins was 24 years old when he died. He had been a hard-working young man managing a pizza store. He did nothing to cause his own death. He was simply at work when Stephen Mobley walked through the door. The 6 other businesses that Stephen robbed continued their operations. The people who worked in those stores recovered from their fear. Stephen's cellmate, whom he had assaulted, eventually gave testimony about what happened. Stephen's parents and sister mourned his execution. Stephen's body was taken from the prison. The case of Stephen Anthony Mobley was closed. The story ends here. Story 7. William Henry Smith was born on October 28, 1957 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was a black male. His mother's name was Bertha Reed. William did not know his biological father. His father was not present in his life at all. When William was still a young child, his mother married a stepfather. This stepfather had serious mental health problems. Later in life, the stepfather was sent to prison for committing rape. The home environment was not safe or stable. William's mother also had mental illness. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia. This is a serious mental condition that affects how a person thinks and acts. She was often abusive toward her children. She would beat them. She would also hide food from them so they could not eat. Because his mother could not care for him properly, William was placed into foster care. He was only 11 months old when this happened. He moved from one foster home to another. He never stayed in one place for very long. This continued until he was 10 years old. Between the ages of 9 and 14, William was sent to Longview State Hospital. This was a mental hospital in Ohio. He stayed there for 3 years. While at Longview, doctors gave him antipsychotic medications. He also received electric shock therapy. This was a treatment used at that time for certain mental conditions. While he was at the hospital, he had a visit from his sister at home. During that visit, his sister hit him on the top of his head with a Coke bottle. This caused a head injury. Doctors at Longview diagnosed William with a few conditions. They said he had an emotionally unstable personality. They also said he had borderline intellectual functioning. This means his ability to learn and solve problems was lower than average. Later in his life, he took an IQ test. His score was 78. A score of 100 is considered average. When William was 11 years old, he started smoking marijuana. When he was 15 years old, he started drinking alcohol. These habits began early in his teenage years. As a teenager, William began getting into trouble with the law. His first juvenile record was at age 15. On January 26, 1973, he was charged with robbery. The juvenile court put him on official probation. A few months later, on July 29, 1973, he was charged with breaking and entering. Again, he received probation and had to pay restitution. On December 27, 1973, he was charged with burglary. The court ordered restitution and sent him to the Job Corps. On July 2, 1974, at age 16, he was charged with unauthorized use of a vehicle. He received probation and a $20 fine. In 1973, he was also arrested for being incorrigible. In 1974, he was arrested for being unruly and for questionable conduct. These were minor charges that did not lead to serious punishment. When William turned 18, his criminal record continued into adult court. On November 14, 1975, he was charged with breaking and entering. He received a suspended sentence of 6 months to 5 years. He was put on probation for 2 years. On March 17, 1976, he was charged with theft for removing copper pipes from a building. He served 10 days in the workhouse. On May 5, 1976, he was charged with breaking and entering again. He received another suspended sentence and 2 more years of probation. On May 18, 1977, he was charged with assault. He had followed a man to his home and beaten him after asking for 10 cents. He received 180 days in the workhouse, with 15 days suspended. William did not follow the rules of his probation. In 1978, he was found guilty of violating his probation. He was restored to probation, but had to serve 3 more years. In 1979, he was declared an absconder. This means he ran away, and the authorities could not find him. In 1980, he was found guilty of another probation violation and was sentenced to 6 months to 5 years in prison. He was paroled later that year. In 1982, he was caught removing copper pipe from a building again. On August 26, 1985, at age 27, William was charged with breaking and entering again. He had broken into a residence and stolen 2 stained glass windows. He was sentenced to 1 year in the Ohio penitentiary. He was released on June 27, 1986. In between these crimes, William had other minor charges. In 1979, he was arrested for gambling and had to pay fines. In 1984, he was charged twice with driving without a license. He paid fines. In 1987, he was arrested for possession of a dangerous drug. He served 5 days in jail. William also had charges that were dismissed. In 1978, he was arrested for aggravated burglary, but the grand jury did not pursue it. In 1984, he was charged with criminal damaging, but it was dismissed. In 1985, while in Atlanta, Georgia, he was arrested for 2 charges of simple battery and disturbing a lawful gathering. Both charges were dismissed. By 1987, William was 29 years old. He was living at his mother Bertha Reed's home in Cincinnati. He had spent much of his life moving between foster homes, a mental hospital, probation, and prison. He had a long history of breaking into places and stealing things. He drank alcohol and used drugs, including marijuana and cocaine. He had never been married. He had no steady job. He spent time in neighborhood bars. His mother's home was about 4 blocks away from an apartment building on a street in Cincinnati. On a Saturday afternoon in late September 1987, William went to a bar called The Race in at 1606 Race Street in Cincinnati. He was a regular there. He did not know that this day would change everything. On that Saturday afternoon, September 26, 1987, William Smith was at the Race and on Race Street in Cincinnati. At the same bar, a 47-year-old woman named Mary Virginia Bradford was also there. She had come to the bar alone. She drank several beers. William met her inside the bar. They talked. They danced together. They spent several hours socializing and drinking. Mary Bradford had a friend named Janice Eccles. Janice was also at the Race in that night. The 3 of them continued drinking together. After some time, they left the Race Inn. They got into William's car. He drove them to another bar called the Queen and Cafe on Central Avenue in Cincinnati. They stayed there for a while longer. At approximately 1:30 in the morning on Sunday, September 27, 1987, the group left the Queen and Cafe. William drove Janice Eccles to another bar and dropped her off. Then William drove Mary Bradford to her apartment. Her apartment was located in the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood of Cincinnati. Mary let William into her apartment. Inside, they continued drinking. They also used cocaine. The cocaine belonged to William. After drinking and using drugs, William and Mary had sexual intercourse. This was consensual, according to the information available. After some time, William left Mary's apartment. He got into his car and drove away. But as he was driving, he checked his belongings. He realized that some of his cocaine was missing. He believed he had left it in Mary's apartment. The cocaine was worth about $2,500. He decided to go back to her apartment to get it. William returned to Mary's apartment. He went inside and confronted her. He accused her of taking his cocaine. Mary denied taking it. She told him that her boyfriend had taken it. William was angry. He felt he had lost a large amount of money. An argument started between them. Mary moved toward the kitchen. She took a small carving knife from the kitchen. William claimed she got the knife first. They struggled. During the struggle, William took the knife away from her. Then he stabbed her in the stomach. She fell onto a chair near the front door. There was a pool of blood in that chair. Mary did not die immediately. She was still alive. She dragged herself or walked from the chair to the bedroom. William followed her. In the bedroom, Mary called him a bad name. He then stabbed her in the neck. He did not stop there. In total, William stabbed Mary approximately 10 times. The wounds were on her neck, her right breast, and her right chest. Some wounds were very deep. 4 of the wounds went into her heart, her lung, her liver, and her ribs. 2 of the wounds were so deep they broke bones. 2 other wounds were inflicted after her heart had stopped pumping blood or when she was very close to death. After stabbing her many times, Mary was lying on the bed. She was bleeding heavily. She was dying. William then removed her pants and her underwear. He had sexual intercourse with her again. He later told police that he decided to have sex with her because she was still breathing. As he was about to finish, he pulled his penis out and ejaculated on her stomach. He said he did this because he was thinking about leaving the apartment. After this, William did not call for help. He did not check to see if Mary was alive or dead. Instead, he started taking her belongings. He took 2 televisions from her apartment. One was a color television. The other was a black and white television. He also took a stacked stereo system with 2 speakers. He made 4 separate trips carrying these items from her apartment down to his car. He took them so he could sell them for money. William then left the apartment. He drove to his mother's house, which was about 4 blocks away. He arrived around 2 o'clock in the morning. He carried the 2 televisions, the stereo system, and the 2 speakers into his mother's home. His mother, Bertha Reed, asked him where he got these items. William lied and said his girlfriend Carolyn gave them to him. His mother did not believe him. She told him he would have to explain more about what was going on. Later that morning, William and his cousin Greg took the stereo system and the 2 speakers away. They left the 2 televisions at his mother's house. William later claimed he sold the stereo in Dayton, Ohio. But that was not true. Police later found the stereo in Cincinnati. William also got rid of the knife he used. He threw it into the Ohio River. He thought it would never be found. At approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, September 27, 1987, a man named Marvin Rhodes went to Mary Bradford's apartment. Marvin was Mary's boyfriend. He had not seen her since Friday. He rang the doorbell. No one answered. He tried the door. It was unlocked. He went inside. He saw blood near the front door. He went to the bedroom. He found Mary lying on the bed. She was nude from the waist down. She was not breathing. She was cold. He touched her face and realized she was dead. He called the police. Police officers arrived. They saw Mary's body on the bed. On the floor near the bed, they found her pants and panties. The clothes were blood-stained and turned inside out. On the bed, they saw an oxygen machine that Mary used because she had asthma. The apartment was otherwise very neat and clean. There were no signs of a big struggle. The chair near the front door had a pool of blood in it. On the floor, there were blood smears and a bare bloody footprint leading from the chair to the bedroom. The murder weapon was not in the apartment. The coroner later examined Mary's body. Her blood alcohol level was 0.13%, which is above the legal limit for driving. Sperm was found in her vagina and on her abdomen. The cause of death was 10 stab wounds and loss of blood. The most serious wounds would have caused her to become unable to move within 5 minutes. Mary was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 116 pounds. She was a small woman. At the time of the crime, no one saw William kill Mary. But people noticed things. Mary's friend Janice Eccles knew William had been with Mary. Mary's boyfriend Marvin knew she had been at the bar. William's mother saw him bring stolen items into her home. These facts would soon lead police to William. On September 28, 1987, one day after Mary Bradford's body was found, homicide detectives began their investigation. They learned that Mary had been at the race in on Saturday night. They also learned that she had left with a man. Witnesses described the man. The detectives identified that man as William Henry Smith. The detectives went to the home of Bertha Reed, William's mother, on September 28th. Her home was about 4 blocks from Mary's apartment. William was not there when the police arrived. Bertha Reed let the officers inside. While inside, one of the detectives noticed a television set. It matched the description of one of the 2 televisions missing from Mary's apartment. The police did not take the television right away. They left and obtained a search warrant. A search warrant is a legal paper that gives police permission to search a place and take evidence. After getting the warrant, they returned to Bertha Reed's home. They searched the house. They found both missing televisions. They seized them as evidence. Bertha Reed also gave the police the clothing William had worn on September 26th and 27th. The police took the shirt and shoes. A forensic laboratory later tested these items. Traces of human blood were found on William's shirt and shoes. Later that same day, September 28th, police found William and arrested him. They took him to police headquarters for questioning. Before asking him questions, the police read him his rights. This is called a Miranda warning. It tells a person they can remain silent and they can have a lawyer. William agreed to talk to the police. At first, William lied. He said he only drove Mary home and dropped her off. Then he changed his story. He said he went inside her apartment, but left when her boyfriend arrived. Then he changed his story again. He admitted he went back to the apartment because he left his cocaine there. He admitted arguing with Mary. He said she got a knife, and he took it from her. He admitted stabbing her in the stomach and then in the neck. He admitted having sex with her again after she was stabbed. He admitted taking her televisions and stereo. He said he made 4 trips to carry the items to his car. He said he threw the knife into the Ohio River. He said he sold the stereo in Dayton. But police later found the stereo in Cincinnati, so that part of his statement was false. Police also seized a pair of undershorts William was wearing. Laboratory tests showed that the shorts had blood on them. The blood was the same type as Mary Bradford's blood. On October 21, 1987, a grand jury indicted William Smith. He was formally charged with 4 crimes. Count 1 was aggravated murder with a specification that he was the principal offender during a rape. Count 2 was aggravated murder with a specification that he was the principal offender during an aggravated robbery. Count 3 was rape. Count 4 was aggravated robbery. William initially pleaded not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity. The court ordered 3 mental health experts to evaluate him. They were a clinical psychologist from the Court Psychiatric Center, another clinical psychologist, and a psychiatrist. They examined William. They concluded he showed no major mental disorder. They said he was sane at the time of the crime. After receiving these reports, William withdrew his insanity plea. William did not have a jury trial. He chose to have his case heard by a panel of 3 judges. This is allowed in Ohio. The 3 judges were Norbert Nadell, Ralph Winkler, and Robert Kraft. They heard all the evidence. The prosecutors presented the physical evidence, the testimony of witnesses, William's confession, and the forensic reports. William's lawyers tried to defend him. The 3 judges found William guilty on all 4 counts. They also found that the 2 death penalty specifications were proved. Those specifications were that William committed murder while committing rape and while committing aggravated robbery. A separate penalty hearing was held. The judges had to decide whether William should receive the death penalty or life in prison. William's lawyers presented evidence about his difficult childhood and his mental problems. They called a psychologist named Dr. Nancy Schmidt-Gosling. She had been appointed by the court to evaluate William. She testified about his family background and his mental condition. She said he had poor impulse control. The judges weighed the bad things William did against the good things about his background. They decided that the bad things were worse. On April 15, 1988, the judges sentenced William to death on each of the 2 murder counts. On the rape count, he was sentenced to 10 to 25 years in prison. On the aggravated robbery count, he was also sentenced to 10 to 25 years. All the sentences were ordered to run together. William was sent to death row at the Mansfield Correctional Institution. William appealed his conviction and death sentence. His case went to the Supreme Court of Ohio. In 1991, that court affirmed his conviction and death sentence. The court said his confession was voluntary. The court said the evidence proved he raped, robbed, and murdered Mary. The court also said that the bad things he did outweighed any good things from his childhood. William then filed appeals in federal court. He asked for a writ of habeas corpus, which is a way for a prisoner to challenge his detention. He argued that his trial lawyers did not do a good job. He argued he should have had his own psychiatric expert. He argued there was racial bias in how death penalty cases were handled. In 2003, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit denied his request. One judge disagreed with part of the decision, but the majority ruled against William. In late 2004, while still on death row, William fainted. Doctors at Mansfield General Hospital gave him a CAT scan of his brain. The scan showed some small areas of calcification, but no tumor or bleeding. The report said there was no evidence of an intracranial mass or hemorrhage. William's lawyers then argued that he had a brain abnormality that could have affected his behavior. They asked for more tests. The state's neurologist said that even if there was an abnormality, it would not affect William's ability to tell right from wrong or to control his actions. The Ohio Parole Board held a clemency hearing on February 8, 2005. William's lawyers asked the board to recommend that the governor spare his life. William spoke to a board member on February 9, 2005. He cried. He took full responsibility for the crime. He said he could not explain why he did it. He said he had been stupid and dumb. He also admitted that during his first year in prison, he had sent a fake letter to Mary's daughter. In that letter, he claimed he was innocent and blamed someone else named Ricky Johnson. He said he later stopped lying and told the truth. The parole board voted 8-0 to recommend against clemency. They said his bad childhood and good prison behavior did not outweigh the terrible things he did to Mary. William's lawyers then asked federal courts to stop the execution. They argued that the brain scan showed an abnormality that needed more study. A federal district judge agreed and issued a stay, which temporarily stopped the execution. But the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit reversed that decision. 13 judges ruled that the 2 brain tests did not prove William had an abnormality that affected his behavior. The execution was allowed to proceed. The date was set for March 8, 2005. The night before his execution, William was offered a special last meal. He asked for a large bag of nacho cheese Doritos chips and a Pepsi. He did not eat that meal. Instead, he ate a sandwich made of ham, turkey, and bologna on Monday night. He did not eat breakfast on Tuesday morning. He did not take a shower. On Tuesday morning, March 8, 2005, William Henry Smith was taken to the execution chamber at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. At 10:19 a.m., he was given a lethal injection. He was pronounced dead. He was 47 years old. He had spent 17 years on death row. Before the execution, William made a final statement that lasted about 4 minutes. He took responsibility for the crime again. He said he had given himself to the Lord. He looked at Mary Bradford's grandson, Timmy Bradford, who was watching through a window. William said, "I hope you have the capacity to forgive. I cannot control anything from this day. Find the right way. Be a better person than I was." Mary Bradford's daughter, Glenda Bradford, did not attend the execution. She said that watching William die would not bring closure. She said nothing could ever bring her mother back. She kept a small photograph of Mary and remembered her as a beautiful person with a good heart. William Henry Smith was the 951st person executed in the United States since the death penalty was brought back in 1976. He was the 16th person executed in Ohio since 1976. He was the first person executed in Ohio in 2005. His body was taken from the prison, and the case of Mary Virginia Bradford's murder was finally closed.